The rain over Las Vegas was a sound you could forget. A fine, silvery static that blurred the neon into watercolor streaks on the windows of the indigo hour. From my corner by the service station, I watched the room breathe. Most people see a supper club and see men in sharp suits, women draped in jewels and laughter. I hear a symphony. The clinking of forks against porcelain was the percussion, the low murmur of 100 conversations, the string section, the sharp pop of a champagne cork, a cymbal crash. My nerves were tuned to it, every shift in tempo, every discordant note of tension. I wasn't just a waitress. I was the unseen conductor of this nightly performance, and I knew the score by heart. Tonight, the music broke. He didn't walk into the VIP lounge. He made an entrance. The room's steady four-quarters rhythm stumbled, falling into an uneasy adagio. Dante Viridian. The name itself was a minor chord played in a dark room. I'd only ever seen him in hushed photographs online. The whispered king of the Obsidian Orchestra, a name too elegant for the kind of business he conducted. In person, he was less a man and more a presence. Wrapped in a suit so black it seemed to absorb the low, amber light. A violin case was held loosely in one hand, but it was his smile that held the real threat. It was a sharp, polished thing, a blade sheathed in charisma. He and his entourage, a collection of granite-faced men who moved with the unnerving silence of predators, swept into the private chamber at the back. The one soundproofed with velvet and secrets. My manager, a man who sweated even in the cold, gestured frantically for me. Table 7, just water, don't speak unless spoken to. Mara, don't look them in the eye, just be wallpaper. I grabbed a silver tray and a crystal pitcher, the condensation cold against my fingers. Inside the chamber, the air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and something else, something metallic and sharp like ozone after a lightning strike. Dante Viridian was leaning against a grand piano, not playing it, but commanding it with his presence. He was laughing, a sound that wasn't joyful but was instead full of sharp, dangerous edges. He slid a sheet of manuscript paper onto the piano's polished surface. "A little composition of mine," he announced to his men, his voice a smooth baritone that coiled around the room. The men, his capos, his lieutenants, whatever they called themselves, looked at the paper with blank, uncomprehending eyes. It wasn't music, not in any traditional sense. There was no melody, no harmony. It was a string of single, stark notes, arranged in a sequence that felt mathematically cold. $10 million, Dante said, the words falling into the quiet room like stones into a still pond. To anyone who can translate it, tell me what the song is about. A heavy silence followed. His men who could probably break bones as easily as I could pour water, were musically illiterate. They stared at the page as if it were written in a dead language. One of them, a thick-necked man with a scar bisecting his eyebrow, grunted, "Boss, it's just notes." Dante's smile widened. "Everything is just notes, Rex, until you understand the arrangement." I stood by the door, tray held steady, my mind racing. My grandmother, who played the accordion in a traveling circus long before I was born, used to send letters like this. She'd hide poems, messages, warnings to her sister across the country, not in words, but in the spaces between the notes. It wasn't about the notes themselves. She'd told me, her voice smelling of cloves and memories. It was about the intervals, the distance you travel from one to the next. That was the key. My eyes scanned the page from across the room, a perfect fourth up, a major second down, a tritone. It wasn't music. It was a substitution cipher, a lexicon of leaps and falls. Each interval corresponded to a letter, a number. It was a language I hadn't heard in 20 years, but one my heart had never forgotten. The man named Rex Callum, the one with the scar, caught my glance. A smirk twisted his lips. "What's the matter, sweetheart?" he sneered, his voice a low growl. "You think you can read the funny dots? Get the boss his water and stop staring." He turned to Dante. "I've got $5 grand that says the only thing she can read is a drinks menu." My breath hitched. The room, the men, the danger, it all faded into a low hum. All I could see were the notes. All I could hear was my grandmother's voice. Listen to the silence between, Mara, that's where the truth lives. I didn't realize I was moving until I was standing beside the piano. I kept my eyes down, focused on the sheet music, under my breath. So low it was barely a whisper. I began to translate. Perfect fifth up. G, minor third down. E, major sixth up. My lips moved without conscious thought, my mind a flurry of calculations, transposing intervals into alphanumeric characters, a string of them, longitude and latitude, a date, a time. It was a set of coordinates, a delivery schedule for something they called a black box. I just laid bare the entire logistical spine of their operation. I finished the last sequence and my whisper died out. The silence that fell then was different. It wasn't heavy or tense. It was absolute, a perfect, terrifying void where the room's symphony had once been. I could feel every pair of eyes in that chamber fixed on me. I finally lifted my head. Dante Viridian was staring at me. His polished smile was gone, replaced by an expression of utter stillness. And then, he blinked. Just once. A slow, deliberate drop of his eyelids that seemed to last an eternity. In a man so composed, it was as loud as a gunshot. It was the rarest of things, pure, unadulterated surprise. Rex Callum's jaw was slack, his earlier arrogance replaced by a pale, shocked look. Dante recovered first. A low, soft chuckle escaped his lips, a sound that was far more unnerving than his laughter had been. Well, he murmured, his dark eyes scanning my simple black uniform, my worn-out shoes, my trembling hands. The wallpaper has a voice. He gestured to the pile of cash on a side table that I hadn't even noticed. It's yours. 10 million? Every instinct screamed at me to take it, to run, to disappear. $10 million was not just life-changing, it was a new universe. No more rent I couldn't pay, no more worrying about my brother Joel's future, no more aching feet and endless nights. But I looked at Dante Viridian, at the cool assessment in his eyes, and I knew that taking his money would be like signing a contract in blood. I would belong to him, another instrument in his orchestra. I took a small step back, clutching my empty tray like a shield. No, thank you, sir, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I don't want it. The surprise flickered in his eyes again, this time mingled with something else. Disbelief. Intrigue. No, he repeated, tilting his head. Everyone wants money. I just want to go home, I said, the truth of it making my throat ache. My shift is over and my feet are tired. For the second time that night, I had struck Dante Viridian silent. He simply stared. The cogs turning behind those obsidian eyes. The ceiling lights glittered, reflecting tiny stars in their black depths. He seemed to be reassessing me, the entire situation, the very laws of physics that governed his world. He lifted a single finger, a subtle gesture to his men who had started to shift, their bodies tensing. They immediately relaxed, melting back into the shadows. He wanted to understand the waitress who knew music. He wanted to understand the woman who refused a fortune because her feet were sore. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. Go home, then. I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and walked out of the room, my back rigid, feeling his gaze on me like a physical weight with every step. I didn't breathe until I was back in the main dining area, the familiar clatter of the club a welcome shield. As I was untying my apron in the locker room, my hands still shaking, I saw it. On the small bench, placed where I couldn't miss it, was a single, thin card. It was made of polished obsidian, cool and heavy in my palm. Etched into its surface were 7 small, vertical slashes. No name, no number, just the mark, a silent, coded invitation. My heart hammered against my ribs, not in a steady rhythm, but in a frantic, syncopated 7/8 time, the time signature of trouble. I quickly slipped the card into my stocking, the sharp edge a cold promise against my skin. As I pushed through the club's main doors and out into the drizzling night, I glanced back through the tinted glass, across the crowded room, past the laughing patrons and the swirling cigarette smoke. I saw him standing in the doorway of the private chamber. He was watching me. Our eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted. It wasn't the look of a predator watching its prey. It was something quieter, more profound. It was the silent, startling recognition of two musicians, hearing the same impossible note across a vast, silent space, finally realizing they weren't playing a solo after all. Outside, the gentle rain had been replaced by a shower of light from the colossal LED billboards. The entire Las Vegas Strip shimmered and pulsed, a grand, chaotic stage with no curtain to hide behind, and I had just been handed a starring role in a performance I didn't understand, for an audience I couldn't see. Home wasn't a place. It was a 19-year-old boy named Joel and the lingering scent of turpentine. We lived in a cramped room at the Sundown Motel in Henderson Flats, where the peeling paint on the walls was less a sign of decay and more a blank canvas for my brother. Joel painted murals, sprawling, vibrant works of art that fought back against the beige misery of our surroundings. He painted to forget the sound that haunted our quiet moments, the memory of our mother's persistent, dry cough, a rhythm that had faded into silence 2 years ago, tonight. He was working on a galaxy swirling out from a crack in the plaster, his brushstrokes sure and steady. He was the only music I had left. After he fell asleep, the city lights painting shifting patterns on his face, I finally took out the obsidian card. It felt cold, unnaturally smooth, a sliver of darkness in my palm. The 7 slashes were less a message and more a measure of music, a time signature. Below it, almost invisible, were 2 more etchings, a location and a time. Studio B7, 2:07 a.m. Not a request, but a summons, a downbeat I was expected to meet. The next afternoon, a woman found me on my lunch break. She was unremarkable in the way that takes immense effort, dressed in a practical gray pantsuit that made her blend into the concrete cityscape. Her name was Kyrie Knox, and her business card read Metropolitan Integrity Bureau, MIBX, a name I'd never heard of, but it had the unmistakable weight of the government. "Mara Quill," she said, her voice a flat, even monotone. "You have a rare talent, a form of auditory synesthesia. We believe you don't just hear sound, you interpret its structure, its patterns." I sipped my lukewarm coffee, saying nothing. "Dante Viridian has been a person of interest to us for a very long time," she continued, unfazed by my silence. "He communicates in ways we can't decipher, encrypted audio files, coded musical phrases. He's a ghost in the machine. We want you to be our acoustic interpreter. Help us translate him." I thought of Joel, of the quiet life I fought to build from tips and tired feet. I thought of the cold obsidian card and the silent command it carried. Inviting one predator into my life was madness. Inviting 2 was a death wish. "I'm a waitress," I said, pushing my chair back. "I think you have the wrong person." I walked away, feeling her analytical gaze follow me all the way back to the restaurant. That evening, a delivery arrived at the motel's front desk. It was a large, extravagant bouquet of lilacs, their scent so powerful it filled our small room, overpowering the turpentine. It was the smell of the old backstage dressing rooms my grandmother used to describe, a scent of glamour and decay. Tucked inside was a small, crisp card. The handwriting was an elegant, sharp script. Music doesn't lie. People do. There was no signature. There didn't need to be. Joel, drawn by the scent, looked at the flowers with a frown. "Who are those from—" "No one," I said, my voice too quick. Later, I found him sketching in his notepad, his charcoal stick flying across the page. He was drawing a man in a sharp suit, his back to the viewer, conducting an orchestra of shadows with long, graceful hands. The figure was unmistakable. My blood ran cold. "Joel, who is that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. He didn't look up. I don't know. Just a man I dreamed about. He was making music out of all the city's quietest sounds. He paused, tapping the charcoal against the page. He felt loud. The next day, my manager called me into his office. He was sweating more than usual, dabbing at his forehead with a crumpled handkerchief. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Mara," he stammered. "Mr. Callum paid me a visit this morning." Rex Callum, the man with the scar and the sneer. He strongly suggested that it would be in the best interest of the club if you kept to yourself. No talking about the clients, no. Remembering things. He finally looked at me, his eyes pleading. "I can't afford to lose my license. Mara, just pour the water. That's all." I nodded, a knot of ice forming in my stomach. Later that day, the head of security mentioned that the audio feed on the cameras in the VIP section had mysteriously cut out. The video worked fine, but the rooms were now officially silent, a warning, delivered in the absence of sound. At 1:45 a.m., I put on my most practical shoes, told a sleeping Joel I was going for a walk, and caught the bus heading downtown. Studio B7 was in a part of the city that progress had forgotten. It was the last standing building on a block slated for demolition, a brick ghost with boarded-up windows. A faded sign above the door read, "Vesper Loom Records." A phantom label. The door was unlocked. The inside smelled of dust and old magnetic tape. A single bare bulb illuminated a cavernous recording studio. And in the center of it all, seated at a dusty Steinway grand piano, was Dante Viridian. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket, just a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up his forearms. He didn't look up as I entered, his fingers moving fluidly over the keys. He was playing a fugue. It was a complex, layered piece of music, with different melodic lines chasing each other, weaving in and out in a dizzying, mathematical dance. It was technically brilliant, but emotionally cold. It wasn't a song, it was a schematic. He played the final chord, letting it hang in the dusty air before the silence reclaimed it. Each theme, he said, his voice calm and resonant in the acoustic space, is a supply route. The first voice, the primary subject, is our main channel through the port, the counter subject. He played another, more intricate line. Is the air freight schedule. The episodes, the moments of free counterpoint, are our variable ground transport. He looked at me then, his dark eyes intense. "You heard the schedule in my VIP lounge. Now, listen to the map of the entire supply chain." My mind raced, connecting the musical patterns to logistical ones. The way the themes inverted suggested a reversal of a shipment, the use of stretto. Where the themes overlapped in rapid succession was a clear indicator of a consolidated, high-priority delivery. He wasn't just playing music, he was rendering his entire operation into sound. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He stood up from the piano, moving with a liquid grace that was both elegant and predatory. "I want you to become my ears," he said, his voice dropping lower. "I am surrounded by men who only listen for threats, for insults, for weakness. They are deaf to the nuances, to the things said without words. The world conducts its business in rhythm, in pattern, in the spaces between the words. I want you to translate the silence for me." I clutched my purse strap, my only anchor in this surreal moment. The fear was a cold, hard knot in my chest, but my grandmother's stubborn pride was in my blood. "I only serve food, Mr. Viridian." A flicker of something amusement, perhaps respect, crossed his face. He didn't try to persuade me with money this time. He knew that wouldn't work. Instead, he leaned against the piano, and the predatory aura around him subsided, replaced by a deep, resonant weariness. "My mother was a music teacher," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on some distant point in the past. In a small town that the Echo Cartel decided to make their own. She was the best. She could take any child and teach them to find the music inside themselves. He paused, his jaw tightening. They wanted her to teach their children. A status symbol. She refused. She said she wouldn't let their poison touch her art. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something beyond the calculated control. I saw a crack in the obsidian. They didn't like being told no. One night, they drove by her studio while she was teaching a free lesson for the neighborhood kids. They fired into the building. They didn't hit her, but they sent their message. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, which made the story even more chilling. I am in this world, Miss Quill, not because I enjoy it, but because it is the only way to get close enough to the men who compose this kind of filth. I intend to burn their entire songbook from the inside out. I didn't believe him. Not completely. It was too perfect a story, too tailored to appeal to the part of me that understood art and principle. But as I listened, I heard something else. Beneath the steady, controlled cadence of his speech, I heard the rhythm of his heart, and in that rhythm, there was a single, dissonant beat, a missed note that vibrated with a frequency I recognized all too well. It was the sound of genuine pain. "I have one rule," I found myself saying, the words coming out before I could stop them. "We don't touch each other's private lives. You don't ask about me. I don't ask about you. We only touch the sound." A slow smile spread across his face, and this one reached his eyes. A fair arrangement. He walked me to the door. "One last thing," he said. "The rhythm of this city is controlled. The traffic lights, for instance, they aren't random. They run on a 4-minute loop. 166 seconds green, 3 seconds yellow, 71 seconds red, if you know the tempo. You can predict the flow. You can make the city dance to your tune." As I stepped out of the studio and into the cool night air, the words seemed like a strange, abstract piece of advice. 10 minutes later, they saved my life. A black sedan with no plates fell in behind my bus. When I got off at my stop, it slowed, its headlights cutting through the darkness. I started walking faster, my heart pounding a frantic allegro against my ribs. The car kept pace. There was nowhere to run, just long, empty stretches of road. Then I remembered his words. Know the tempo. I looked ahead to the next intersection. The light was green. I started to count in my head, estimating the cycle. I slowed my pace, deliberately, forcing the sedan to slow with me. 3, 2, 1. Just as I reached the crosswalk, the light turned yellow. I sprinted across the street. The sedan sped up to follow, but it was too late. The light flashed red. A crosstown freight truck, which had been waiting patiently, blasted its horn and thundered through the intersection, cutting the sedan off completely. I didn't look back. I ran all the way to the motel, my lungs burning. Miles away, in a darkened surveillance van, Kyrie Knox watched the grainy footage from a traffic camera. She saw the black sedan, the girl walking, the sudden, perfectly timed sprint. She looked at the traffic grid data on another screen. It wasn't luck, it was timing. She picked up her pen and wrote in her logbook, "Subject is a natural." She deciphers rhythm as fast as a safecracker. My work for Dante Viridian began not in shadows, but in sound waves. The Obsidian Orchestra didn't move contraband in dusty warehouses. They traded in futures and influence on an encrypted audio platform called Dorsal. It was a blind auction house for the digital age, a place of immense power that looked, on the surface, like a music-sharing site. There were no bids in dollar amounts. Every transaction, every offer, every hostile takeover was a custom 800 8-drum pattern. A deep, resonant kick drum might signify an opening bid on a tech startup. A crisp, cracking snare could be a counteroffer for a block of real estate. The intricate, skittering hi-hats determined the terms. It was a language of pure rhythm, impenetrable to the uninitiated. We worked from the dusty silence of Vesper Loom Studios. Dante would play the day's market activity through the high-fidelity monitors, a relentless pulse of electronic percussion, and I would listen. I filled a worn notebook, not with words, but with staff lines and notes. I was creating a dictionary. A dotted quarter note followed by 2 16ths in the kick pattern meant liquidate assets. A syncopated snare hit on the offbeat was a request for leverage. I translated the percussive chaos into a map of shifting power, a ledger of greed and ambition written in the language of the beat. One afternoon, Dante stood behind me, watching me work. My pencil flew across the page, charting out the complex polyrhythms of a particularly aggressive play for a shipping firm. "You're not just translating, Mara," he said, his voice a low hum that seemed to vibrate in the air behind me. "You're composing. You're finding the musical theory behind their chaos." He looked at my notebook, at the pages filled with my unique shorthand of rhythm and meaning, and the expression on his face was one I'd never seen before. It was the look of a man who had worked his entire life with crude tools, only to be handed a microscope. It was through Dorsal that we found the first whispers of the Crimson Ledger. They were a rival outfit, more brutal and less elegant than Dante's organization. They were making moves, but their patterns were sloppy, almost brutish. Then we found their real method of communication. It wasn't on the network, it was in the air, in a new, exclusive club in the heart of the Strip. Polaris 9, a temple of glass and neon built on a synthwave aesthetic. "They're using ultrasonic signals," Dante explained, showing me a spectrogram on his laptop, a high-frequency spike, well above the range of human hearing, pulsed in a steady, repeating pattern from within the club. It's a marker. They embed it in the club's sound system. Anyone they want to target, they just need to get them inside. The signal activates a tiny receiver, something the size of a grain of rice, that can be slipped into a coat pocket or a drink. It marks them for a future transaction. "You want me to go in," I stated. It wasn't a question. "I need you to go in," he corrected gently. "I need you to listen to that signal. They're launching their biggest play on opening night. I need to know what they're saying." I thought of Joel, sleeping peacefully in our motel room, a universe of swirling galaxies still drying on the wall above his head. My life was now a tightrope walk over a canyon, and I couldn't bear the thought of him falling with me. "He has to be safe," I said, my voice firm. "Joel, I want your guarantee that whatever happens, nothing touches him." Dante's gaze was steady and unwavering. "You have my word. No one will ever touch your brother." Polaris 9 was an assault on the senses. Laser lights sliced through clouds of artificial fog, illuminating a sea of writhing bodies. The music was a relentless, four-on-the-floor beat with a driving synth bass that you felt in your bones. Dante had secured me a waitress uniform and a position for the night. My job was to circulate, to listen beneath the noise. As I navigated the crowded floor, I could feel it, a faint, high-pitched pressure in my ears, like a mosquito whining just at the edge of hearing. The ultrasonic signal. As I got closer to the main speaker arrays, the pressure intensified, but I also detected another frequency, a low-level hum that was out of place. It was the telltale sign of an active induction microphone, a vibration sensor. Someone else was listening. I remembered the business card in my wallet. MIBX was one possibility, or someone else. There was another agency Kyrie Knox had mentioned in passing, a rival of theirs, the Federal Commerce Vigilance, the FCV. If their device received a signal on the same frequency as the ultrasonic marker, the feedback loop would create a cascade failure. At best, it would blow every speaker in the club. At worst, it could spark a fire. My mind raced. I found a service panel behind the bar, pretending to look for cleaning supplies, with trembling fingers. I found the frequency modulator for the sound system and nudged the ultrasonic broadcast up by a few dozen kilohertz. It was a tiny shift, imperceptible to any receiver, but enough to move it out of the FCV's sensor range. The low hum in my ears vanished. Later. Rex Callum cornered me near the service station, a false smile on his face. "Boss says you're the golden goose," he said, his voice slick with suspicion. "Heard a rumor from one of my contacts. He said the Ledger boys are making their move tonight using a 3/3 rhythm in their signal, a waltz. You hearing that?" I paused, holding a tray of empty glasses, and met his gaze. It was a childishly simple trap, A waltz, in a synthwave club pumping out a 120 beats per minute house track. It was the musical equivalent of wearing a tuxedo to a beach party. No one waltzes in a place like this. Rex, I said, my voice flat. I walked away, leaving him standing there, his trap sprung on nothing but air. I focused back on the signal. The ultrasonic pulses were a language of their own, a staccato burst of information. I closed my eyes, letting the thumping bass of the club fade away, and listened to the silent conversation happening all around me. A location, a time, a payload. But there was another sound, a discordant rhythm that didn't belong. It was organic, a heartbeat. Most of the people in the club had hearts beating in time with the music, a collective, synchronized pulse. But this one was different. It was a rapid, unsynchronized gallop, a frantic, panicked rhythm hidden beneath a calm exterior. My eyes snapped open and scanned the room. My gaze landed on a bartender at the far end of the main bar. He was handsome, smiling, mixing drinks with a practiced flair, but his heart was screaming. I watched his hands. As he poured a drink for a man in an expensive suit, the target, I realized his other hand moved below the bar. I heard a faint, almost inaudible fizz, the sound of a chemical reaction. He was mixing something into the drink. There was no time to shout, no way to get there. I looked across the club and saw Dante, standing in a shadowed alcove, watching me. I lifted my hand to my tray. My fingers tapped out a quick, urgent rhythm against the metal. A staccato phrase in our private language. Danger. Now, kill the sound. His eyes narrowed in understanding. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The world went black, not just the lights, but the music, the sound, everything. A sudden, total sensory deprivation. The collective roar of the crowd died, replaced by a wave of confused and startled gasps. In that single moment of disoriented silence, I heard movement from the alcove, Dante's people, moving with a speed and silence that was terrifying. When the emergency lights flickered on a few seconds later, the man in the suit was gone. The bartender was still there, a look of pure confusion on his face, the tainted drink still in his hand. Chaos erupted, but it was controlled. No shots, no screams of pain, just a clean, silent extraction. From a nondescript sedan parked across the street, Kyrie Knox lowered her audio-enhancing binoculars. She hadn't heard the ultrasonic signal, but she had seen it all: the waitress, the tapping fingers, the instant blackout, the target's disappearance. She made a note in her file. They don't communicate, they resonate. The two of them leap across moral voids like dancers. The next evening, back at the studio, Dante placed a small, heavy object on the piano. It was an antique metronome, its wooden case polished smooth with age. Engraved on a small brass plate at its base were 5 words: "Keep time when all else falls apart." "A gift," he said simply, "for hearing the notes no one else can." A week later, a thick envelope arrived for Joel from something called the Pharaoh Muse Foundation. It was a full, 4-year scholarship to the finest art institute on the West Coast, all expenses paid. The foundation was anonymous, its funding untraceable. But I knew. I could feel Dante's signature on it, a silent act of keeping his word. The same day, a notice was posted on the door of the Indigo Hour. It was an official city ordinance violation, issued by the MIBX. The charge was persistent urban volume violations. It was a threat, cloaked in bureaucracy. Cooperate or they would take away the only legitimate thing I had. That night, I didn't dream in images or stories. I dreamed in sound. I dreamt I was floating in a dark, empty space, and the only things that existed were chords. Loneliness was a sustained, melancholic minor seventh. Fear was a screeching, atonal cluster. And somewhere, far off in the distance, was a single, clear, resonant note that sounded like hope, a note I knew I had to find. The city had become a cage of eyes and ears. Kyrie Knox and the MIBX were a constant, humming pressure. While Rex Callum's suspicion was a discordant note I could feel at my back even when he wasn't there. The air in Las Vegas was thick with observation, so Dante took me where there was nothing to hear but the wind. He drove us far out into the desert, the neon glow of the Strip shrinking in the rearview mirror until it was just a faint, pulsing memory on the horizon. Our destination was a ghost, an abandoned drive-in movie theater. The ticket booth was a hollowed-out skull, and the parking spaces were slowly being reclaimed by sagebrush. Dominating it all was the screen, a colossal white slab against the deep indigo of the twilight sky. The wind, unobstructed for miles, hit the massive screen and made it hum, a low, resonant sound like the breathing of some great, sleeping beast. We sat on the hood of his car, a black sedan that seemed to drink the last of the light. The silence out here was different from the manufactured quiet of the studio. This was a deep, ancient silence, full of space. "Listen," Dante said, his voice a low murmur that didn't disturb the quiet. "What does it say?" He meant the wind. It was a constant presence, whispering as it swept through the dry brush, moaning as it flowed over the dilapidated concession stand, singing a high, lonely note as it caught the edge of the screen. I closed my eyes, filtering out the individual sounds and listening to the composition as a whole. It was a symphony of desolation and freedom. "It says, 'Trust me,'" he offered, his interpretation colored by his own nature, a command, an assurance. I heard something different, in the rise and fall of the pitch, in the spaces between the gusts. I heard a plea. "It says, 'Don't leave me,'" I whispered. He didn't respond, but I felt him shift beside me, the subtle change in his posture a question he didn't ask. "My grandmother," I began, the story surfacing unbidden. "The one from the circus. She was a high-wire walker for a time. She said the most dangerous thing up there wasn't the height, it was the rhythm. Your own panicked heartbeat, the sway of the wire, the gasps of the crowd. It could all throw you off. So she learned to find a different rhythm." I looked out at the vast, empty desert. She would use the wind. She'd listen to its cadence and match her breathing to it. She'd find the beat in the flapping of the tent canvas and time her steps to that. She taught me how to find the music in things that aren't music, and how to hold on to it when you're scared. It's a way of not feeling so alone. Dante was a phenomenal listener. He didn't interrupt, didn't interject with his own experiences. He simply absorbed the story, his stillness a vessel for my words. He created a space where a memory I hadn't spoken of in years felt safe to emerge. Just then, a distant boom echoed from the direction of the city, followed by a faint, celebratory crackle. Someone was setting off fireworks. It was miles away, a harmless burst of light and sound, but beside me. Dante flinched. It was almost imperceptible, a slight tensing of his shoulders, but I saw his hand resting on the hood of the car, and it was trembling, a fine, uncontrollable tremor, the vibration of a string pulled too tight. The memory of his mother, the gunshots fired into her studio. The sound had an echo in him, a phantom limb of pain that ached decades later. Without thinking, my hand moved to cover his. I didn't grab or clutch. I simply laid my palm over the back of his hand. His skin was warm against the cooling desert air. I could feel the frantic, unsteady pulse in his wrist, a hummingbird's rhythm of old trauma. His fingers, which I had only ever seen move with absolute precision over piano keys or a sheet of music, were rigid. For a long moment, he remained frozen. Then, slowly, as if surrendering a piece of himself he had guarded his entire life, his fingers curled up and laced through mine. His tremor subsided, his pulse gradually slowing until it found a steadier, calmer beat against my own. He turned his head, and in the faint starlight his eyes were no longer the impenetrable obsidian I was used to. They were dark pools of a vulnerability he never showed anyone. The carefully constructed fortress around Dante Viridian had a crack in it, and I was standing right inside the breach. The distance between us vanished without a word. The movement was slow, a magnetic pull that felt both inevitable and terrifying, a crescendo building note by note. His free hand came up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek, a touch so gentle it seemed to question its own right to exist. Our foreheads touched, and we stayed that way for a long moment, just breathing the same air, our heartbeats a quiet percussion in the vast silence. When he kissed me, it was not with the fire and fury I might have expected from a man like him. It was a question, a slow, tentative exploration, a deep, resonant chord of tenderness and restrained longing. There were no clever words, no grand declarations. Our story was told in the language of touch, in the way his hand slid from my jaw to the nape of my neck, his fingers weaving into my hair, in the way my hand tightened its grip on his, an anchor in a sudden, overwhelming sea of sensation. He was the conductor, and I was the music, and for the first time, the composition felt like it was being written for two instruments. We moved from the hood of the car to the worn leather of the back seat, a clumsy, graceful dance in the dark. His suit jacket landed in a heap on the floor, a discarded piece of armor. The moonlight, slicing through the dusty car window, traced a silvery path along his collarbone, down my arm. Our movements were a quiet conversation, a series of unspoken agreements. It was a discovery of trust, a synchronization of rhythms that had nothing to do with business or danger. It was the feeling of being completely safe with the most dangerous man I had ever known. We were two people who lived in a world of rigid control, finally learning how to let go. In the quiet darkness of the desert, we whispered about a piece of music that was no longer a solo. Afterward, we lay tangled together, listening to the desert wind, our synchronized heartbeats the only rhythm that mattered. Dante had switched on the car radio, tuning it to an old AM station that was mostly static, the crackle and hiss a strange kind of lullaby. I rested my head on his chest, tracing the lines of his shirt, feeling the rise and fall of his breathing. And then I heard it. Beneath the random chaos of the static, there was a pattern, a faint, structured pulse. It was weak, almost entirely buried in the noise, but it was there. A repeating sequence of short and long bursts of signal interference, Morse code, but cruder, hidden in the carrier wave of the radio station itself. I sat up, suddenly alert. "What is it?" Dante asked, his voice thick with sleep. "The static," I whispered, closing my eyes to concentrate. "There's something in it." I listened, my mind working like a telegraph operator's, translating the rhythmic pulses. It was a sequence of numbers, coordinates, a time, and one word, a name. It was Rex. He was using this forgotten radio frequency, this ocean of noise, to communicate, to call a meeting, to set a trap meant for someone else, using a different location than the one discussed on Dorsal. Dante was instantly awake, the softness gone, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged focus. He sat up, his eyes hard. "Where?" I told him the coordinates, a desolate freight yard on the other side of town. His jaw clenched, and I could feel the anger rolling off him in waves. "I'll take a team," he said, his voice a low growl. "We'll be waiting for him." It was the predator's instinct to hunt, to confront, to end the threat head on. "No," I said, putting a hand on his arm. "That's his rhythm. That's the beat he's expecting. A direct confrontation." He looked at me, confusion warring with his anger. "You don't hunt the hunter," I said, the words coming to me with a strange clarity. "You change the tempo. You introduce a rest where he expects a note. You make the predator, so used to his own rhythm, stumble over a beat he didn't see coming." He stared at me, his mind processing my words. I could see him turning the idea over, looking at it from all angles. The idea of not meeting force with force was alien to him, a foreign key in a familiar scale. But he had seen what I could do. He had learned to trust my ear. For the first time since I had met him, Dante Viridian relinquished command. He looked at me. The leader of the Obsidian Orchestra, the man who conducted a symphony of crime across the city, and gave me the baton. "Tell me what to do," he said. And in that moment, our relationship was rewritten. It was no longer a contract, no longer an arrangement of convenience. It was a duet. With stakes higher than either of us could have imagined, our duet became a quartet. But the first new note in the composition came not from us, but from a third, unseen orchestra, the Bureau of Urban Harmonics. The BUH was a phantom city agency, a department of data scientists and audio engineers who monitored the city's operational rhythms. They discovered an anomaly at the Dryline freight docks, a place of diesel-fueled rumbles and the percussive clang of shipping containers. On the rooftops, overlooking the channels, someone had installed a series of high-intensity strobe lights, the kind used for aviation warnings. But they weren't blinking randomly. They were communicating. A network of silent sirens. Dante acquired the BUH's raw data through means I didn't ask about. He projected the footage onto the wall of the studio, a silent film of flashing lights. "They're talking," he said. "Crimson Ledger, this has to be them." I watched the frantic, pulsing rhythm. It was faster than any code I had encountered before. A frantic, almost panicked conversation written in light. I broke it down, measure by measure, translating the duration of each flash and the interval of darkness between into a coherent syntax. It took hours. When I was done, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the studio's poor heating. "It's a manifest," I said, my voice hoarse. "For an outgoing shipment, they're not selling weapons or data. They're selling artificial heart components. Pacemakers, defibrillators, off-market, uncertified. It's a black market medical supply line." The revelation hung in the air, heavier than any discussion of guns or money. This was a different kind of crime, one that preyed on desperation, on life and death itself. My new reality also brought unwanted attention. Kyrie Knox cornered me outside the motel, her gray suit a patch of officialdom against the peeling stucco. There was no pretense this time. "We know you're working with him," she said, her voice flat. "We want in. We want to hear what you hear." She held out a tiny, flesh-colored object, a state-of-the-art in-ear comms device. "You will wear this when he speaks, when you translate. We will be listening." It was a violation, a wiretap they wanted to plant directly into my skull. "No," I said, my voice shaking with a rage that surprised me. "This is not a request," Kyrie said, her eyes cold. "We have a file on your brother, an impressive artistic talent. It would be a shame if his new scholarship were suddenly revoked due to a clerical error. It would be a bigger shame if he were brought in as an accessory to Viridian's operations." The threat was a physical blow. They had found my frequency, my one vulnerable note. Joel. I felt trapped, a string vibrating between two opposing forces. I looked at her, my resolve hardening into something cold and sharp. "Fine," I spat. "I'll wear your bug. But if you so much as look in my brother's direction, if his name even appears on one of your reports, I will go silent. You'll get nothing from me, ever again. Do you understand?" She gave a curt nod. The deal struck. Dante's response to the Crimson Ledger's new venture was swift. He assembled his own ensemble, a specialist quartet for this new, complex piece of music. Tamsin Vale was a brilliant, pragmatic audio engineer who could build a ghost frequency or map the acoustic weaknesses of a building in minutes. Huck Rail was the driver, a former stuntman who saw traffic not as a series of cars, but as a fluid, rhythmic dance he could lead. And Price Noon, a lanky, quiet hacker who spoke in code and moved through digital systems like a phantom, listening to the hum of data streams. Our plan was codenamed Syncopate. The ledger's transactions for the medical parts were all routed through Dorsal, using a new set of audio codes. The plan was to hijack their next big transaction. Price would create a duplicate of their encoded audio file, a perfect forgery. My job was to subtly alter the rhythmic structure of the fake file, changing the embedded delivery coordinates from their secure warehouse to an abandoned cold storage facility Dante's organization controlled. Lapis Yard. Tamsin would then broadcast our forged audio file over their network at the precise moment of the transaction, creating a seamless swap. Huck would be waiting to secure the shipment. We gathered in the studio to plan, the air thick with technical jargon and nervous energy. Rex Callum was there, observing, his presence a constant, low hum of distrust, as Tamsin explained the intricacies of carrier frequencies. Her assistant, a quiet woman named Lena, handed out schematics. I watched Lena's hands. She was right-handed. I'd noticed it before, but as she listened to Tamsin, her left hand was tapping out a nervous, syncopated rhythm on her thigh. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, a waltz. I froze. Rex's trap at Polaris 9, the lie about the 3/3 rhythm. It wasn't a random guess. It was a tell. He had been testing me, and in doing so, he had revealed the signature rhythm of his own network of informants. Lena was the mole. She was Rex's listening post inside our operation. The night of the operation was a tense, staccato affair. I sat beside Tamsin in a surveillance van a block from Lapis Yard. Dante was in a separate car with Price, while Huck was parked in the shadows near the facility's gate. I was wearing Kyrie's earpiece, a silent, itching reminder of my compromised position. "They're initiating the transfer." Price's voice crackled over our comms. "Ready to broadcast the ghost signal. Mara," Tamsin said, her fingers poised over her laptop. My heart was pounding. I knew Lena had already passed on our location. This was a trap. "Wait," I said, "something's not right." "We have to go now, or we miss the window," Tamsin urged. Before I could argue, the world outside erupted in flashing red and blue lights. Tires squealed on pavement. FCV, not MIBX, a different agency entirely. They swarmed the entrance to Lapis Yard, setting up a blockade. "It's a raid," Huck's voice was tight with panic. "They were tipped off." Dante's voice was dangerously calm, but I could hear the fury underneath. "There's a false note in the orchestra. They knew our location, but they didn't know I knew about them. We had seconds." My eyes darted around, searching for an instrument, a way to change the composition on the fly. And then I heard it. The low, mournful sound of a train horn from the nearby freight tracks, signaling its approach to a crossing. It was my only option. I grabbed the comms microphone. "Huck, listen to me," I said, my voice clear and commanding. I hummed 2 distinct pitches into the mic, a perfect fifth apart. "That's the horn you're about to hear. When it blows, you move, not before. Price. Can you access the rail network controls?" "Give me 10 seconds, he replied. "The delivery truck is 2 blocks away," Tamsin warned. 10 seconds is all we need," I said. "Dante, the new location is the Aurora Float, the floating loading dock at Pier 4. Get there." Price came back on. "I'm in. What do you need, Mara?" "Make the train sing," I commanded. On the tracks, the train's horn suddenly blasted out a complex, rhythmic sequence. 2 long blasts, 3 short, a pause. 1 long, it wasn't a standard warning signal. It was a message. My message. Huck, hearing the sequence, slammed his car into gear and peeled away from Lapis Yard. The delivery driver, seeing the FCV raid and hearing the signal he had been briefed to listen for, didn't even slow down. He sped past the chaos at Lapis Yard and rerouted toward the waterfront. Our plan was only a partial success. Huck secured the truck at the Aurora Float. Inside, we found the prize, the Ledger's acoustic ledger, a server containing every coded transaction they had ever made. But one shipping container from the manifest was missing. It had been on a different truck, one that had slipped through the net. It was the container filled with the pacemakers, designated for a network of underground clinics serving people with no insurance and no hope. We had their secrets, but they still had the hearts. The next day, Dante did something that shocked me. He didn't plan a war. He didn't retaliate. He made a call. He negotiated. He used a portion of his own untraceable funds to buy the pacemakers back from a shadow charity that acted as a front for the Crimson Ledger. He traded his money for their merchandise, a simple, clean transaction. He was a criminal, using criminal means to do something undeniably right. He was ensuring that hundreds of impoverished people would not die. I saw the gray in him then, not black, not white. He was a man navigating a world devoid of simple morality, using the tools of the darkness to create a small pocket of light. In her surveillance van, listening to the recording from my earpiece, Kyrie Knox closed her file on the night's events. She wrote a single, concluding thought at the bottom of the page. Viridian isn't black or white. He's a thinking shade of gray. The quiet that followed our partial victory was a fragile, held breath. We had the Crimson Ledger's playbook, their acoustic ledger. But the victory felt hollow, incomplete. The cost of it, the missing medical supplies, the deal Dante had to make in the shadows left a dissonant hum in the air between us. The politics of this world were a tangled composition, and I was beginning to understand that every resolution was just a cadence leading to a more complex movement. The new movement began with a perversion of our language. A video file arrived on Dante's secure network, addressed to him, but meant for me. There was no sound. The screen was black, except for a single, blindingly bright light, flashing in a frantic, terrifying rhythm. It was a silent, strobing ransom note. In the center of the light's glare was the battered, bruised face of Huck Rail, his eyes wide with fear. Rex Callum had made his move. The video was his declaration of war, a formal announcement that he was a double agent for the Crimson Ledger. The flashing light was the demand me, in exchange for Huck. I watched Dante as he viewed the file. The calculated composure he wore like armor dissolved, burned away by a white-hot rage. His hands clenched into fists, the knuckles white. He was a man built of control, but seeing one of his own broken and used as a bargaining chip sent a tremor through his entire being. This was the raw, untempered fury I had only glimpsed before. He wants a trade. He'll get one. Dante snarled, his voice a low growl that was more animal than human. I'll go myself. I'll walk right into his trap and tear him apart from the inside. No, I said, my eyes fixed on the screen, on the pulsing light. That's the downbeat. That's the first note of his song, and he's expecting you to play it. We can't. My mind was already working, filtering out the horror of Huck's face and focusing on the rhythm. It was a complex polyrhythm, a message layered within a threat. While Dante paced the studio like a caged tiger, I transcribed the light patterns. It was a location, a time. But underneath the main rhythm, there was a subtler pulse, a ghost frequency in the light. It was a secondary message, a piece of arrogant boasting. It gave the location of what he called the kill point, the place where the exchange was meant to turn into an ambush. The Orion Cooling Tower, an old, decommissioned industrial structure on the edge of the city. Just as I deciphered the last word, my phone buzzed. It was a picture message from Joel, and he was so proud. He'd found a new wall, a place he said had great acoustics. The picture showed him standing in front of a vast, curving concrete wall, the base of a colossal, cylindrical tower. He was smiling, his face smudged with paint, a can of spray paint in his hand. My blood turned to ice. He was at the Orion Cooling Tower. The text below the picture read, "Starting my masterpiece. The reverb in here is epic." The world tilted. The air left my lungs in a silent gasp. It was the most hideous counterpoint I had ever heard. My two loyalties, the life I was building for my brother and the new, dangerous life I had stepped into, had just collided in the worst possible way. A choice was laid before me, stark and brutal. Huck, a man who had trusted Dante, and by extension, me, or Joel, my brother, my reason for everything, who had innocently wandered into the crossfire. It was a single choked note that broke my heart. My terror must have shown on my face. Dante stopped pacing, his rage momentarily forgotten as he saw the look in my eyes. I showed him the picture. The color drained from his face. He understood instantly. The trap wasn't just for me anymore. It was for my entire world. He stood before me, the internal war visible on his face, the instinct to lash out, to meet violence with violence. warring with the cold, hard logic of the situation. He looked at the schematics I'd laid out, at my frantic transcriptions of the light patterns, and then he looked at me. A decision settled in his eyes. He was a conductor who realized his orchestra was out of tune, and he needed someone who could hear the true pitch. He placed his hands on my shoulders, his grip firm, grounding. "I can't hear it, Mara," he said, his voice raw with a desperate honesty. "My anger is too loud. All I can hear is the beat of his war drum. I can't see the way through." He looked directly into my eyes, and in that moment, he wasn't a crime boss or a strategist. He was just a man, terrified of losing what was important. You're the only one who can hear the way home for both of them." He was giving me the baton. He was entrusting me with the entire composition. The weight of it was crushing, but the trust behind it was a sudden, clear note in the chaos. I took a deep breath, forcing the panic down. I had to orchestrate this. I had to write the music that would bring everyone back alive. "Okay," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "Here's what we do. We split the orchestra." I turned to Tamsin. "Rex will have Huck locked down. Electronic locks, most likely. Can you find their resonant frequency? Overload them with a sympathetic vibration." Tamsin nodded, her eyes bright with the challenge. "It's not science fiction. Every lock has a frequency. If I can get close enough, I can make it shake itself apart. It'll be loud, but it'll be fast." "Good," I said. I turned to Dante. "Rex is expecting you or me to walk into the tower. He's not expecting a full assault on the location where he's holding Huck. You will lead a decoy team. Price will create a ghost signal. Make it look like our entire force is moving on Huck's position. You will make a lot of noise. You will draw their attention. Your part of the symphony is the distraction, loud, chaotic, and completely overwhelming." "And you?" Dante asked, his eyes searching mine. "I'm going to the Orion Tower," I said, "alone." He started to protest, but I cut him off. "Rex wants me. He's arrogant. He'll be there waiting for his prize. He won't expect me to be the one on the offensive. He'll be listening to your noise, and he won't hear my silence. It's the only way." I went to the Orion Tower alone. The vast, hollow structure hummed with a low, industrial drone. Water dripped from rusted pipes, each drop a percussive tick in the oppressive quiet. I found Joel on the ground floor, so engrossed in his mural he hadn't noticed anything was wrong. Standing behind him, a long, thin blade held loosely in his hand, was Rex Callum. "The golden goose arrives," Rex said with a triumphant sneer. "I knew he'd send you." "Let my brother go." "Rex," I said, my voice even. "He has nothing to do with this." Rex laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed in the cavernous space. "He has everything to do with this. He's your rhythm, your weakness." He gestured around the tower. "You know, his mother used to bring him here. Before he was Dante Viridian, king of the underworld, he was just a kid with an uncanny ear. She would teach him about acoustics in this very room." He took a step closer, his eyes burning with a resentful fire. "I was her student, too. I worked harder than him. I practiced until my fingers bled. But he just heard it. She would play a complex chord, and he could name every note. He always got to hear it first. He always got the praise. His motivation, when it finally came out, was so petty, so pathetic. It was the bitter, festering jealousy of a second-chair violinist. He lunged, but I was ready. I wasn't a fighter, but I was a musician. I understood timing. In my hand, I clutched the antique metronome Dante had given me. As Rex moved, I swung it, not as a weapon, but as a timekeeper. I threw it against a metal pillar a few feet away. The sudden sharp clack was a percussive shock. It was an unexpected beat, a syncopation he wasn't prepared for. His lunge was timed to the rhythm of his own aggression, and for a split second that unexpected sound broke his tempo. He flinched, his eyes darting toward the noise. It was all the delay I needed. I shoved Joel behind me as Rex's blade sliced through the air where my throat had been a moment before. He stumbled, off balance, I grabbed Joel and ran, but as we scrambled away, Rex swiped wildly. I felt a searing pain in my forearm as his blade caught me. Not deep, but enough. We dove behind a large concrete support as he cursed, regrouping. Suddenly, the main doors burst open. Dante stood there, framed by the fading light, his face a mask of cold fury. He didn't have a weapon, but he didn't need one. He was the weapon. He moved with a terrifying speed, and the fight was over before it began. He disarmed Rex with brutal efficiency, and in seconds, Rex was on the ground, gasping with Dante's hands around his throat. This was it. The old rhythm, the law of his world, an eye for an eye, a life for a life. He was going to kill him. I saw the decision in the tightening of his muscles. "Dante, no!" I shouted. He looked at me, his eyes wild. He saw the blood on my arm. Joel huddled behind me and his face hardened. "This is how it ends," he growled. "No," I said, my voice pleading. "You told me you wanted to burn their songbook. Don't become another verse in it. Write a different ending." He looked at the sputtering, pathetic man on the floor, then back at me. He was at a precipice, staring down into the violent melody that had defined his life. And then he made a choice. He let go. He stood up, taking a deep breath, and broke the rhythm of revenge. He turned Rex and the acoustic ledger we'd taken from the Crimson Ledger over to the FCV, the Bureau, hungry for a high-profile win. Took all the credit, leaving the MIBX fuming on the sidelines. The next day, Kyrie Knox met me in a quiet cafe. She slid a plastic card across the table. It was a temporary, unofficial immunity waiver. "The Bureau is not pleased about the FCV's victory," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "But you've proven your value. This will keep you and your brother off any official records, for now." She stood to leave. "We will, however, require one final translation from you at a time of our choosing. Consider it the price for our silence." She left me there with the card, a get-out-of-jail-free pass that felt more like a leash. We had won, but I was now indebted to two different, opposing conductors, each with their own symphony they wanted me to play. After the cacophony of the Orion Tower, Dante brought me to the quietest place in his world, high above the ceaseless thrum of the indigo hour. Accessible only by a private elevator, was a rooftop greenhouse. It was a glass box filled with stars, the reflected city lights from below, and the real, faint desert stars from above. The air was warm and humid, thick with the intoxicatingly sweet, funereal scent of hundreds of night-blooming hyacinths. This was his mother's sanctuary, he explained in a near whisper, a place he maintained exactly as she had left it. My arm throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache. Dante said nothing more as he gently guided me to a small wrought iron bench. He worked with a focused, almost reverent silence. His large, capable hands surprisingly gentle as he cleaned the gash on my forearm. He was a conductor tending to a damaged instrument, his touch precise and careful. The sting of the antiseptic was a sharp, staccato note in the warm, floral air. When he was done, a neat white bandage stood out starkly against my skin, a visible reminder of the discord we had just survived. I expected words then, an explanation, a justification, an apology. Instead, he walked to a corner of the greenhouse where an old, polished wooden cabinet stood. From it, he retrieved a vintage reel-to-reel tape player. With painstaking care, he threaded a fragile, aging tape through the machine. He flipped a switch, and after a moment of soft, crackling hiss, a sound filled the greenhouse. It was a piano, a simple, hauntingly beautiful melody, a lullaby full of melancholic grace. The performance wasn't perfect. There was a slight hesitation on one of the arpeggios, a human imperfection that made it all the more real. This was his mother. This was the only recording he had of her playing. He didn't need to say a word. He was handing me the key to his entire composition, the source code of his pain and his purpose. He was letting me hear the music that played in the deepest, most guarded chamber of his heart. I watched his face, bathed in the soft glow of the city lights filtering up through the glass. The iron control was gone. replaced by a profound, unguarded sorrow. His own heart was out of time, a frantic, pained rhythm that the music both soothed and agitated. I stood up and walked to him, and in a gesture that felt more instinctual than planned, I laid my palm flat against his chest. I could feel the frantic, discordant beat of his heart against my hand. I didn't speak. I closed my eyes, listening to his mother's melody, and I began to breathe in time with it. Inhale on the downbeat, exhale through the phrase. I felt his own breathing begin to subconsciously match mine. I focused on the rhythm of the music, letting it flow through me, through my hand, into him. His heartbeat. A frantic bird trapped in a cage began to slow. The panicked rhythm eased. The sharp edges softened until, miraculously, it fell into sync with the gentle tempo of the piano, his heart, his mother's music, and my breathing, all finally playing in the same time signature. He let out a shaky breath, and when I opened my eyes, he was looking at me with an expression of such raw vulnerability that it made my own heart ache. That was our confession, not of love, not yet, but of something deeper, an acknowledgement of a shared key, a mutual understanding that went far beyond words. He was the conductor of the city's dark orchestra, but for the first time, he had let someone else set his tempo. He let me be his metronome. His hand came up to cover mine, pressing it tighter against his chest. The cool air from a ventilation duct ghosted across my skin, raising goosebumps on my arms, a stark contrast to the warmth of his touch. He led me back to the bench, and this time, when he pulled me close, there was no hesitation. I initiated it, a small act of taking the lead, my fingers tightening their grip on his hand, drawing him in. Our kiss was long and deep, a slow, unfolding melody that was not about passion, but about sanctuary. It was about the profound relief of finding a place to rest in a world that demanded constant vigilance. It was interrupted once by a soft, incredulous laugh that escaped my lips, a bubble of impossible joy in the midst of so much darkness. He answered with a smile against my mouth, a true, genuine smile that reached the depths of his eyes. We talked for hours, our voices low, weaving around the scent of the hyacinths. We talked about home, not the motel room with its peeling paint or his vast, empty penthouse. We spoke of home as a frequency, a person who hears your native rhythm when the rest of the world is noise. You are the conductor of silence, I told him, the words feeling more true than anything I had ever said. You're the only one who hears what people are saying when they're not speaking. He looked at me, a soft, wondrous light in his eyes. And you, he said, his voice a low caress, are the only one who can hear the music. The next morning, I went to see Joel. The change was remarkable. One of the pacemakers Dante had recovered was now working its quiet miracle inside my brother's chest. The bluish tint was gone from his lips, and the constant, weary breathlessness had been replaced by a new, steady energy. He was already planning his next project, his eyes bright with excitement. He showed me the finished mural on the wall of a community hospital, a picture he'd taken on his phone. It was his masterpiece. A swirling, cosmic backdrop, and in the center, not our faces, but our symbols. A graceful, curving treble clef and a strong, resolute bass clef, intertwined, inseparable, a duet without words. That evening, back in the greenhouse, Dante looked out at the sprawling, glittering city. When this is over, he said, when we decipher this final arrangement with the ledger, we should go. Leave Las Vegas. I can set you and Joel up somewhere safe, quiet, a place where the only rhythm is the ocean. It was a beautiful offer, a perfect fantasy. A few weeks ago, I would have clung to it like a life raft, but I wasn't the same person. I wasn't the shy waitress anymore, the girl who translated the world from the safety of the sidelines. I had stepped onto the stage. Running is just a pause in the music. Dante, I said softly. The song will still be playing when we stop to catch our breath. We have to face it. We have to rewrite the ending." He turned to me, a question in his eyes. "We expose them," I said, the idea blooming in my mind, audacious and terrifying. "We don't fight them in the dark. We drag them into the light. We use their own methods against them. We use art. We use music." The plan took shape between us, a shared composition. We would use Dante's newly acquired funds to host a high-profile charity concert, Hearts in Harmony. To benefit the city's underfunded cardiac care units, the audience would be the city's elite, the press, the philanthropists, and the vipers hiding among them. And the music itself, a new concerto, would be our weapon. I would embed their crimes into the very fabric of the score. Every illicit transaction from their acoustic ledger, every dirty deal, would be translated into a musical motif. When the orchestra played, we would be broadcasting their sins for the entire world to hear. Before we set the plan in motion, I received a text from an unknown number. "Cafe on Fremont, 10 minutes. It was Kyrie Knox. She sat across from me, a cup of black coffee untouched in front of her. I told her our plan. I needed to know if the MIBX would stand in our way. She listened with her usual unnerving stillness. "It's a bold strategy," she said when I had finished, her voice a flat, analytical line, "a public execution set to music." She looked out the window at the people passing by. "But you should remember something about music, Miss Quill, and about light." She met my gaze, her eyes as gray and unreadable as a cloudy sky. "Light casts shadows," she said. "The brighter the spotlight, the darker the shadow it creates behind you. When you're standing on that stage, under all those lights, you'll be the easiest target in the whole city." She stood up, leaving her coffee untouched. The warning was clear. The MIBX wouldn't stop us, but they wouldn't protect us either. We were on our own. I walked back to the Indigo Hour and told Dante what she'd said. He simply nodded, his face set with a calm resolve. He took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. We both knew the risk. We had accepted the terms. The stage was set for our final performance. The Solace Dome was a pearl in the heart of the desert, a magnificent modern concert hall with acoustics so perfect you could hear a heartbreak from the back row. Tonight, for the Hearts in Harmony Gala, it was filled with the glittering elite of Las Vegas. Casino magnates, tech billionaires, and philanthropic old money rubbed shoulders in the lobby, their polite laughter the string section for the evening's prelude. But woven among them, dressed in the same expensive suits and couture gowns, were the darker notes of the city's symphony, the money launderers, the fixers, the high-level players from every organization, including the Crimson Ledger, all masquerading as patrons of the arts. They were here to be seen, to network, and to unwittingly witness their own execution. Backstage, the air was a tense court of rosin, perfume, and adrenaline. I wasn't in a waitress uniform tonight. Dante had insisted on a simple, elegant black dress. I was not staff. I was the composer, my concerto. The centerpiece of the evening was a Trojan horse built of music. Hidden within its melodic lines and harmonic structures were the financial sins of the Crimson Ledger. Each account number was a musical motif. Each illegal transfer was a dissonant chord progression. The acoustic ledger we had captured was now a symphony. Tamsin had worked with the BUH, convincing a faction within the Bureau that this was the only way to expose a rot the FCV and MIBX were too clumsy to excise. They had retrofitted the stage lighting system with sophisticated spectrum analyzers. Price had written the code that linked them to the audio feed from the conductor's podium. When the orchestra reached the key passage, I had written a specific, complex sequence of notes the system would activate. It wouldn't just flash lights, it would project the raw data from the ledger onto the vast, curved dome of the ceiling, transforming the evidence of their crimes into a stunning, inescapable work of data art. Dante found me in the wings. He was in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, the uniform of a maestro, not a mob boss. He looked completely at home, his usual dangerous stillness now channeled into a conductor's focused calm. He handed me a small velvet box. Inside, nestled on a bed of satin, were a pair of simple, elegant earrings, each a single, teardrop-cut piece of quartz. "For clarity," he said, his voice a low, steadying bass note in the pre-show jitters, "so you can always hear the true pitch." He helped me put them on, his fingers warm against my skin. For a moment, we just stood there, the chaos of the orchestra tuning up around us a world away. He was about to step onto a stage and declare war on a powerful enemy, using my music as his weapon. He was betting everything on my ability to hear the truth. Then he walked onto the stage. The applause was thunderous. He bowed, turned to the orchestra, and raised his baton. A hush fell over the 1,000-seat hall. He looked out, his gaze sweeping over the audience, over the guilty and the innocent, and then his eyes found mine, standing in the shadows of the wings. The entire world narrowed to that single, unbroken line of sight. It was a silent promise, a shared downbeat. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then the music began. The concerto was a story of a heart, beginning with a fragile, searching melody in the strings. It was my story, Joel's story, the story of the people whose lives the ledger had gambled with. The music swelled, growing more complex, more agitated. The motifs began to appear. The coded data of the Crimson Ledger's accounts, woven seamlessly into the orchestration. A sharp, aggressive brass fanfare represented a shell corporation in the Caymans. A frantic, skittering woodwind passage was a series of rapid-fire transfers designed to muddy the trail. To the audience, it was a thrilling, modern piece of music, to me, and soon to everyone. It was a confession. I watched the faces in the front rows. Severn Blaze, the purported philanthropist and head of the Crimson Ledger, was sitting there, a smug, satisfied look on his face. He was enjoying the show, completely unaware that he was listening to his own eulogy. The concerto reached its crescendo, the final movement. This was it. The music built, layer upon layer of sound, a frantic, complex wall of harmony and rhythm. Dante's movements became sharper, more intense. He was not just conducting, he was commanding, wrestling the very sound from the air. The orchestra responded, playing with a fire and precision that was breathtaking. Then came the moment, the point of no return, a sudden, dramatic rest, a collective intake of breath that left the entire hall in stunned silence. In that perfect, still moment, Dante's eyes found mine again. He raised his baton. He was giving me the final beat, the last word. I nodded. He brought the baton down, and the orchestra exploded into the trigger phrase, a complex, dissonant chord that seemed to tear a hole in the fabric of the silence. The effect was instantaneous and biblical. The stage lights flared, and beams of structured light shot up to the ceiling. The dome, a moment before a dark, starless sky, was suddenly alive. Swirling, intricate patterns of light and color bloomed across its surface. A beautiful, abstract galaxy of information. The data from the ledger names, account numbers, transaction dates was rendered as a stunning, undeniable work of art. A collective gasp went through the audience. At first, it was wonder. Then, as names and numbers became clearer, the wonder turned to confusion, and then to dawning, horrified recognition. Severn Blaze's face went from smug satisfaction to ashen disbelief. He reached inside his jacket, pulling out a small device. He pressed a button. Nothing happened. The lights stayed on, the data still swirling above us, in the wings. Price gave me a thumbs up from behind his laptop. He had anticipated their move, creating a ghost network, an uninterruptible power supply for the light and soundboards that bypassed the main grid entirely. The hall erupted. It wasn't a panic, it was a schism. The innocent were frozen in shock, while the guilty scrambled. Shouts echoed through the magnificent acoustics, and then the doors burst open. Men in tactical gear swarmed in from all sides, but they weren't unified. On one side, the FCV, moving with brute force, On the other, the MIBX, led by Kyrie Knox, moving with a cold, calculated precision. The two agencies immediately began shouting at each other, a jurisdictional turf war breaking out right there on the marble floors as their targets scattered. In the chaos, I saw him, Severn Blaze. He wasn't running for an exit. He slipped behind the stage, heading for a small, unassuming door marked with an acoustic warning symbol, the post-acoustic passage, a soundproofed service corridor designed to isolate the stage from the rest of the building. "Dante!" I shouted over the din. He was already moving, vaulting off the stage, his conductor's tuxedo a black slash in the flashing emergency lights. We met at the door and plunged into the tunnel after Blaze. The silence was a physical blow. The corridor was an anechoic chamber, every surface covered in thick, sound-absorbing foam. The roar of the concert hall vanished, replaced by the thumping of my own heart. The only light came from dim, emergency fixtures on the floor. It was a sensory deprivation trap. We couldn't hear him. We could barely see. "How do we find him?" Dante whispered, his voice a dead, flat thing in the sound-sucking air. I put my hand on the metal wall. We listen with our hands. I felt for a vibration, a tremor, anything. The tunnel was a long, straight tube, but I could feel a faint, rhythmic shuddering through the steel plates under my feet. His footsteps. "This way." We ran, our own steps swallowed by the foam. I led us by the vibrations, a trail of breadcrumbs only I could feel. But then the vibrations stopped. The tunnel opened into a junction, branching in 3 different directions, and the air was suddenly filled with a high-pitched whine, an ultrasonic noise that scrambled my senses, masking any subtle vibrations. A sonic jammer. "We lost him," Dante said, frustration roughening his voice. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the high-frequency noise. I needed a resonator, something to focus the tiny, residual vibrations of his movement. My hand went to my ear, the quartz earring, a gift for clarity. I took it off, the smooth, cool crystal a solid thing in my trembling hand. I knelt down, placing the earring gently on the cold concrete floor at the center of the junction. Quartz vibrates at a stable, predictable frequency. It would ignore the chaotic, high-frequency noise of the jammer and resonate only with the low-frequency, rhythmic vibrations of a person's movement. I watched it, holding my breath. For a second, nothing happened. Then the teardrop of crystal began to tremble, vibrating almost imperceptibly, and it began to rotate, its pointed tip turning slowly, inexorably, toward the left-hand tunnel. It was a compass needle, pointing the way. We took the left tunnel, which ended at a heavy steel door. Dante kicked it open, and we were blasted with the cold, damp air of the waterfront. We were on the Aurora float, the same floating dock from before, and there, at the far end of the pier, was Severn Blaze. He wasn't running anymore. He was standing beside a large, open crate. He looked at us, a desperate, feral grin on his face. "A brilliant performance," he shouted over the wind, "but you're too late for the finale." He gestured to the crate. Inside was a complex array of sonic emitters, all aimed at a central focusing dish. A large, red digital timer was counting down from 5 minutes. It was a sonic bomb. Not an explosion of force, but of sound, an acoustic shockwave powerful enough to cause catastrophic, irreversible damage to anyone within range, a symphony of death. And we were all standing on the stage. The wind on the Aurora float was a wild, untamed thing, whipping off the dark water and screaming around the shipping containers. It was a chaotic, violent piece of music, and Severn Blaze was its conductor. Before Dante or I could react, 2 of Blaze's men emerged from behind the sonic weapon, moving with a brutal speed. One slammed Dante back against a railing while the other grabbed me, twisting my arms behind my back. The rough texture of nylon cable bit into my wrists as he bound me tightly. Blaze laughed, a sound that was immediately snatched away by the wind. He dragged me forward, positioning me in front of him, a human shield. He held a small, flat device with a single red button against the side of Dante's neck, a wireless trigger. The eternal choice. "Viridian," Blaze shouted, his face contorted in a mask of manic triumph. "Your masterpiece." He gestured to me with his head. "Or the city. This device will activate the primary charge, a focused sonic pulse that will turn every bone in her body to powder. But if I lift my thumb," he said, pressing the trigger more firmly against Dante's skin, "my other men, listening on a secure line, will activate the main array, a wide-angle acoustic blast. It won't be lethal at a distance, but it will cause permanent neurological damage to everyone within a 2-mile radius. Think of it, a symphony of screams." The digital timer on the bomb continued its relentless, silent countdown. 2 minutes. I saw the decision in Dante's eyes. He looked at me, his face a canvas of anguish and fury, and in that instant I saw him choose. He was going to lunge for the trigger, sacrificing himself and the city to save me. It was a noble, beautiful, and suicidally stupid idea. He was playing the exact note Blaze had written for him. I couldn't speak. My throat was tight with fear, but I could still keep time. I dug the heel of my shoe into the metal decking of the pier. 3 sharp taps, a pause, then 2 more. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap. It was our rhythm, the private code we had developed in the quiet hours at the studio. It meant only one thing: break the rhythm. Dante's eyes flickered down to my foot, then back to my face. The suicidal fire in his gaze lessened, replaced by a flicker of questioning trust. He was listening. I had to give him a new piece of music to play. I closed my eyes, blocking out everything but the sound. I listened to the wind as it vibrated through the taut nylon cables binding me. Each cable was a string on an instrument, and the wind was the bow. Each one hummed at a specific frequency. I filtered through the noise, isolating the pitch of the thickest cable. The one looped around my waist. The frequency was fluctuating, not randomly, but in a slow, steady repeating pattern, a rhythm. My mind raced, translating the hertz into a number. It was a rate, breaths per minute. The timer wasn't on a clock. It was a bioacoustic trigger, synchronized to the respiratory rate of the person standing closest to it. Severn Blaze. I opened my eyes and looked at Dante. I took a deep, exaggerated breath in, and then let it out slowly. Then another. I was conducting him, showing him the new tempo. He understood immediately. He closed his eyes. His body, which had been a coiled spring of tension, relaxed. The frantic, vengeful rhythm in his posture eased. He began to breathe, long, slow, meditative breaths, a technique I knew his mother must have taught him years ago to calm his own frantic energy. He was slowing his own heart rate, his own respiration, projecting a field of calm in the midst of the storm. Blaze was closer to the device, but Dante was a more powerful instrument. His biological rhythm was overriding Blaze's agitated one, pulling the sensor's focus. On the bomb's display, the timer began to drift. The numbers slowed, the seconds stretching out, becoming thick and sluggish. The countdown was falling below the threshold for activation. "What are you doing?" Blaze snarled. Seeing the timer falter, he looked from Dante's serene face to my desperate one, and he understood. With a roar of pure rage, he shoved me aside and lunged for the bomb's control panel. "If you want to play it slow, let's just skip to the finale." His fingers flew across the keypad, manually overriding the biosync and increasing the power output to its maximum setting. The timer snapped back into a frantic, accelerated countdown, 45 seconds. "Mara?" The voice was a shock, a familiar note in a foreign composition. "Joel?" He scrambled out from behind a stack of pallets, his face pale with terror but his eyes blazing with a desperate resolve. In each hand, he held a can of spray paint. He must have followed me. A tracker on my phone. A brother's intuition. It didn't matter. He was here. He didn't run at Blaze. He wasn't a fighter, he was an artist. He saw the composition of the scene and knew what it was missing. He ran towards the sonic device, and with 2 swift, practiced motions, he sprayed a thick, reflective silver stripe across the 2 largest emitter dishes, the focusing lenses of the weapon. He had given me a target. He had made the invisible visible. 30 seconds, Blaze gloated. Dante looked at me, a question in his eyes. What now? The rhythm was broken beyond repair. "Kiss me," I said, the words coming out in a rushed whisper. He stared, confused. "Mara, this isn't the time." "Now, Dante," I insisted, my voice urgent. "It's not a goodbye. It's a downbeat. I need your rhythm." "Exactly." I grabbed the front of his tuxedo jacket, pulling him towards me. "Trust me." He did. His mouth found mine in a desperate, frantic kiss that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with survival. It was a transfer of data, of trust, of life itself. I put my hand on his chest, feeling his heart hammer against his ribs, a frantic, panic drum solo. I focused, my own heart a chaotic mess. I had to find the beat. I listened, not with my ears, but with my soul, and I found it. A single, shared pulse beneath the terror. Our heartbeats, two panicked, asynchronous rhythms, began to align, to find a common time signature, until they were beating as one. One heart, one rhythm, one single, unified note. Across the water, Tamsin watched her oscilloscope, the feed coming from a long-range microphone aimed at the pier. She saw the two chaotic heart rhythms on her screen suddenly merge into a single, clean, powerful scene wave. That was her cue. "Now! Price!" she yelled. Price's fingers flew across his keyboard. He injected his code, a stream of digital static, into the bomb's internal clock via a wireless back door he'd found. A jitter code. It wouldn't stop the timer, but it would make it unstable, unpredictable. On the pier, I broke the kiss. "Now," I breathed. Our hearts were still in perfect, terrifying sync. Blaze, his face a mask of insane glee, slammed his thumb down on the red button of the trigger in his hand. Tamsin hit her broadcast key. A wave of pure energy erupted from the device, but it wasn't sound, it was silence. A profound, deafening, absolute silence that was more powerful than any explosion. Tamsin's phase-inverted frequency had met the bomb's acoustic wave at the exact millisecond of its creation, turning it back on itself. The crescendo had collapsed into a vacuum. The sound wave had devoured itself. Severn Blaze stood frozen, his thumb still on the trigger, his face a mask of utter disbelief. The symphony of death had ended on a silent note. The silence was broken by the sound of approaching sirens and the clatter of boots on the pier. Kyrie Knox and her MIBX team swarmed the float, their movements precise and efficient. She walked straight past Dante and me, up to the catatonic blaze. She didn't use handcuffs. She snapped a wide, metallic collar around his neck. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. A sonic dampener, a silent command. She turned and looked at me, a single, appreciative eyebrow raised. She gave me a curt, almost imperceptible wink. "Have you translated enough for one lifetime, Miss Quill?" she asked, her voice the only sound in the sudden calm. Dante moved to my side, his knife a silvery flash in the strobing emergency lights as he sliced through the nylon cables binding my wrists. I stumbled forward, and he caught me. We clung to each other, the smell of salt and ozone and sweat mingling between us. I pressed my ear to his chest, beneath the fine fabric of his shirt. I could hear it, a steady, strong, living rhythm. A heart that was still beating, a song that was not over, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like it was playing in time with my own. The morning after felt like the day after a hurricane. The sky was a washed-out, exhausted blue. The news channels were a cacophony of carefully orchestrated noise, a symphony of spin. At a packed press conference in front of the Solace Dome, the city's various phantom agencies took their bows. The FCV, all bluff and bluster, claimed full credit for dismantling a vast, dangerous criminal enterprise. The MIBX, cool and aloof, countered by uploading terabytes of our acoustic evidence to a public server, a silent, damning rebuttal that stole the FCV's thunder. And in a strange, ironic coda, the Bureau of Urban Harmonics received a mayoral commendation for their role in maintaining the city's safe acoustic infrastructure. It was a masterclass in bureaucratic fiction, a story told in headlines and redacted reports that was far stranger than the one we had actually lived. Dante conducted his own press conference. He didn't hide. He stood before a phalanx of cameras and, in a calm, steady voice, announced the formal and permanent dissolution of the Obsidian Orchestra as a business entity. He didn't admit to any crimes. He simply stated that the organization was evolving. In its place, he was establishing the Obsidian Foundation, a fully audited, transparent, public-facing nonprofit dedicated to funding community cardiac care and subsidizing artistic endeavors for underprivileged youth. He was taking the machinery of his dark symphony and rewriting its entire score, transforming it from a tool of power into an instrument of grace. He was stepping out of the shadows and into the light, not as a king, but as a benefactor. I, on the other hand, retreated from the light. I turned down every interview request, every offer for a book deal, every plea for my expert analysis. My story was not for sale. Instead, I used a portion of the funds from the Hearts in Harmony Gala to rent a small, quiet studio space, far from the glitz of the Strip. I opened a free workshop for children with speech and communication disorders. I called it the Acoustic Canvas. I taught them to find their voice not in words, but in rhythm. We used drums, chimes, and tapping fingers to express joy, anger, and fear. I was teaching them how to give silence a language, how to translate the noise inside their heads into a music the world could understand. Joel's mural at the community hospital became a landmark, the duet without words, they called it. People came from all over the city to take pictures of the intertwined treble and bass clefs. It was hashtagged, shared, and became a symbol of the city's resilience, a piece of public art that told a secret story of survival and harmony. My brother, who had once painted galaxies on a crumbling motel room wall, was now painting hope onto the heart of the city itself. A week after the press conference, a slim, unassuming envelope arrived at my new studio. Inside was a single official-looking card. It was a permanent, non-expiring grant of full legal immunity, signed by a judge whose name I didn't recognize. Tucked in with it was a handwritten note on plain paper. The script was neat, devoid of flourish. "When the city gets noisy again, call me." There was no signature, but I knew it was from Kyrie Knox. It was a final, silent transaction, a clean slate, with one single string attached. That night, Dante came to my studio. The children were gone, but the air was still filled with the lingering, chaotic energy of their creativity. He didn't speak. He just looked around at the small drums, the finger paintings on the walls, the simple, quiet life I was building. Then he walked over to a small table and picked up the antique metronome he had given me. He wound it up, but instead of setting it to a standard tempo, he adjusted the weight on the pendulum with minute, careful movements. He held it up to his ear, listening, then made another tiny adjustment. He placed the metronome on the table between us. It began to tick, a steady, familiar rhythm. It was a perfect 72 beats per minute, the exact, resting rhythm of my own heart. He didn't get down on one knee. He didn't present a diamond ring. He just looked at me, his dark eyes full of a light I never thought I would see. "You gave me back my own rhythm, Mara," he said, his voice as soft as the ticking of the metronome. "You heard the music in me when all I could hear was the noise." He took my hand, his thumb stroking my pulse point, feeling the beat that matched the one he had just set. "Will you be the conductor for the rest of my life?" My answer was not a word, but a step forward, into his arms. We stood there for a long time, the steady ticking of the metronome the only sound in the room. Our two hearts, finally, perfectly in time. Later, in the rooftop greenhouse, with the scent of hyacinths heavy in the air and the city glittering like a fallen constellation below, we found a new kind of quiet. His jacket lay forgotten on a bench, a piece of discarded armor he no longer needed. We stood by the glass, his arms wrapped around me from behind, my head resting against his chest. It was an intimacy born not of passion, but of a profound and unshakable trust. It was the warmth of his hand covering mine on the railing, the feeling of his chin resting gently on the top of my head, the shared, easy rhythm of our breathing. We whispered promises, not of forever, but of the present. A promise to always listen, to always help the other find the true pitch when the world went out of tune. It was the deep, resonant feeling of being completely and utterly safe, of being home. The old world faded like a final, dying chord. We saw a news report about Rex Callum being led onto a transport ship. His mouth gagged, his eyes still frantically counting the rhythm of the waves, a man hollowed out by his own jealousy. Severn Blaze, we were told, had vanished. He was entered into a top-secret federal program with the absurdly theatrical name of Echo Shield, a loose end tucked away to perhaps unravel another day. The main threats were resolved, the primary conflicts silenced. The Indigo Hour reopened, not as a supper club for the city's powerful, but as a benefit stage. The first performance of its new life was a simple one. A single stool was placed on the stage, and one of the cardiac patients who had received a pacemaker from Dante's Foundation sat on it. A sensor was attached to their chest, and for 3 minutes, the only sound in the packed, silent room was the strong, steady, amplified beat of their heart, a solo performance of a life saved, a rhythm of pure hope. Dante and I stood on the balcony of his apartment, looking out at the city, the relentless noise of Las Vegas, the sirens, the traffic, the distant thumping of a nightclub no longer felt like a threat. It was just a city, singing its chaotic, complicated song. We had learned to translate its noise into a kind of peace, to find the quiet moments between its frantic beats. He leaned down, his lips brushing my ear. "What do you hear now, Mara?" he whispered. I smiled, leaning back against him. "Our key." I said, "A perfect C major." Just then, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a message from an encrypted unknown number. There were no words, just an attachment. I opened it. It was a single page of sheet music, a new composition, complex and strange, with a time signature I had never seen before. Scrawled at the bottom of the page, as if in a great hurry, was a single, handwritten note. "Translate this, if you want to save the hearts on the other side of the desert." I looked at the score, at the new, impossible music. Then I looked up at Dante, at the man who had learned to conduct the silence, and I smiled. "It seems," I said, showing him the phone, "we have an encore. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and let's connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to my channel, Mafia Boss Stories. Give this video a like and consider hitting the hype button to help this story reach even more listeners. Your support means the world.